Attraction for me is such a delicate thing. It is unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And we often think of attractiveness as maybe, this body part on the person is a certain shape or their face looks like this. But the older I've gotten and the more I look back on my life, the more I've come to believe that there's almost like 1,000 tiny little micro expressions or something in the air which makes us attracted to someone else. And so when we're giving people advice on how to be attractive, I wonder if most of the advice is pretty futile because it's deeper than that.
Right.
It's so much deeper than that.
Yeah, so and you're totally right about that. I mean, the fact is attraction is idiosyncratic and finicky, right? So all of us, when we think about the things that we find sexy and attractive, there's going to be a lot of ways that you're going to disagree with other people, right? Like you're going to think that somebody like is so sexy to you. And other people might say, yeah, she's all right, but it doesn't really do it for them. And there is an element to our attraction that is very person-specific and idiosyncratic, right? And might there be some evolutionary roots behind all of that? Maybe, right? So it could be, for example, that the kinds of qualities that you find, just really attractive in another person that make you feel so attracted to them might be cues that they are a really compatible mate for you. And maybe that's why you have a very sort of you-specific response to that person. But there are also dimensions that are shared, right? So we know, for example, that men tend to place a greater emphasis relative to women on cues related to physical attractiveness. And that physical attractiveness tends to be related to things that have historically been related to fertility, right? So for example, having an hourglass body shape, we know that this is something that's related to a woman's level of sex hormones, and that women with higher levels of estrogen, for example, are more likely to put on fat around their butt and their thighs and less likely to put on fat around their waist relative to women with higher or lower levels of estrogen, right? As estrogen levels decline when women age, their bodies become more straight up and down than they do hourglass. And this has to do with changes in estrogen. And so we know that that's something that men generally desire to a greater extent than women, right? We also know that men tend to place a greater emphasis on cues related to youthfulness, right? So the cues that are related to maturity in a face, that's something that women tend to have a heightened preference for. So if somebody has sort of an older face, they tend to be seen as more attractive. Like 50-year-old George Clooney seems more attractive. Most women think that looks more attractive than, 25-year-old George Clooney. And we see that because our brains have inherited this tendency to find cues related to wisdom and status and resource acquisition, all of which come with greater age. Women have inherited that preference for those kinds of qualities because that would have given them a mating-related advantage relative to preferring a more youthful face. Conversely, for men, they would have been penalized if they had a preference for maturity in the face of a potential partner. Because if you like women who have signs of maturity and wisdom and resource acquisition ability, you'd probably choose somebody who's approaching menopause, right? And that's not going to lead to any gene transmission at all, right? And so we tend to see that men have a heightened preference for cues related to youthfulness in faces. And so even though, yes, there are differences between individuals and there is some idiosyncrasy that tends to characterize human mate choice, there are a lot of things that we can actually make some pretty strong predictions about too. So there are some overall themes that tend to characterize men's and women's partner preferences.
Is it true that men are less attractive to successful women? Is there any sort of evolutionary basis for that?
I do know that research finds that men don't place as much of a priority on that compared to women. But I don't know that they penalize them exactly, right? If you show a man a photograph of a woman who's dressed like a CEO and she's gorgeous, and you show a man a picture of a woman who's dressed like a Burger King service, person, and she's drop dead gorgeous, men are going to find her similarly attractive in both conditions. It doesn't matter. Woman could be doing, it doesn't matter what the woman is doing. And there's been research that shows this. They'll show men and women photographs of people in different types of outfits. And the men's ratings of how attractive the women are has just everything to do with how attractive the women are. For women rating men, It all depends on what they're wearing, right? Do they show cues to resource access? Do they not show cues to resource access? And women tend to modulate how physically attractive they find men based on whether or not they have these cues related to provisioning ability. So I don't know if there was a really attractive, and there are a lot of really attractive females in positions of power, men will find them just as attractive as they do somebody who's not in a position of power, although they may be, potentially less likely to choose them as a long-term mate, if there's issues related to power dynamics and that sort of thing that they don't want to mess with.
What about jealousy? And specifically, is the term intersex, of women being jealous of women, men being jealous of men. You mentioned a second ago that if, 60% of the college educated or college attendees or 70% of them are women, and there's only a pool of 30% which are men, isn't there going to be a ton of competition amongst women? And what direction does that competition travel in? Is it low status women having competition with high status women, or what is it?
I mean, the competition, when you have cases where there's an asymmetrical sex ratio, and like we do on college campuses, I mean, women are very competitive amongst one another for access to the men that are available. And oftentimes the way that this, like the form that this tends to take, is that women become increasingly likely to be willing to do whatever men want of them in order to be chosen as a mate. And what we've tended to see on college campuses is because men are more oriented toward casual sex and non-committed relationships than women are, what we tend to see is that short-term hookups and casual sex tend to be very common on college campuses. And in part, this is the result of the fact that women are competing for access to mates. And one of the ways that they can compete for access to mates is to be willing to do whatever it is that men want in terms of providing, the structure of the relationship. And if men are only looking for casual sex, even though women tend to be more oriented toward long-term relationships, they're going to be more inclined to just give in to whatever it is that the men desire as a means to be able to get a partner.
Are women more competitive with beautiful women or women that are less stereotypically and socially considered beautiful?
Oh, women are more competitive with beautiful women. I mean, there's just no question about that. And the reason for this is that given that this is something that men desire in their partners, this is the primary dimension by which women compete for access to partners, right? And so this is the big one. Given men place a really pretty strong priority on physical attractiveness in their choice of partners. And in fact, one of the biggest predictors of a woman's upward social mobility in the US is how physically attractive a woman is. And in fact, that's a bigger predictor of a woman's upward mobility than her education level or even her socioeconomic status of origin.
When you say upward social mobility, what do you mean?
I mean the ability to transcend the social class in which you were born.
Okay.
So if you're somebody who was, working class or middle class or upper class, your ability to transcend those ranks of socioeconomic status is more strongly predicted by physical attractiveness than a woman's education level. And that's like a tough thing that's a tough nut to crack, tough pill to swallow.
So women are more competitive against beautiful women in the lens of society and stereotypically.
Yes, and one of the ways that women compete against one another is by derogating their competitors, right? And derogating their competitors just meaning saying mean things about them or saying mean things to them. And a lot of times those mean things that they have to say have to do with a woman's attractiveness, right? They'll try to downplay how attractive she is to other people by saying things like, oh, she's had a lot of work done, right? That's the thing that you'll hear women say about each other or to men about other women. And this is something that's done to try to manipulate other people's perceptions of that woman's value. But because attractiveness plays such an important role in terms of a woman's ability to successfully attract a romantic partner, this is a dimension in which women are fiercely competitive, even when they don't want to say that they are and want to pretend that they're not, right? I think that the Barbie movie was, sort of got at some of these kinds of issues and just this idea that women want to pretend like none of this stuff matters, right? And that it's not that important and that we don't value this stuff. But nonetheless, this is still a very important domain of competition for women. It always has been. I think it probably always will be.
Are women more likely to trust a beautiful woman or a woman that is less stereotypically beautiful? Because I was thinking about this this thing about gay male shopping sales associates. It was a test that you did, right?
Yeah. So I have one of my former, this is digging deep. So one of my former students who was really into, and so he's a gay man, and just to set the stage for all of this, he became really interested in the friendship that tends to form between gay men and straight women, which is actually, this is something that happens everywhere. So having like the gay man and the straight woman friendship is something that's not just, something that we see in Europe and the US. It is sort of cross-culturally ubiquitous. And he was trying to understand this relationship. And one of the things that he noted in his research is that the people who tend to form friendships most frequently with gay men are beautiful women. It's like attractive women who are more competitive and potentially may perceive more competition on the part of other women. And they form these friendships because gay men can provide them with really important information that's relevant on the mating market that is not colored by one, intersexual competition, right? So if you say to these pants make me look fat, right, your gay man friend isn't going to tell you, no, they look great, even though they make you look terrible because they're trying to send you out and look terrible, right? So there's no thread of competition in that relationship. And there's also not the fear that this person's just trying to get you in bed, right? And so there's this really nice trust that women can have with gay men.